Welcome to Envision Radio from the United Way of Greater Charlottesville in the City of Promise and News Radio 98.9, 1070 AM, WINA Radio. And brought to you by the Jefferson School Foundation with Marky and Price coming to you from right here in downtown. Today we're thrilled to be joined by Mariane Doyle, the Executive Director and CEO of the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So here's my thing. Hold on. How do you get an ED and a CEO tag? Why do I only have one?
Yeah, how does
Robbie's
that work?
got a president and
Yeah,
CEO
how does that
tag.
work?
I feel like
no.
I got the
You
short
wanna
end
know
of the
what?
stick.
It's in the bylaws. Listen.
And those two things mean different things, and you do have both of them.
Like you get to be,
bylaws.
you're an executive and a chief.
Oh boy.
Like, what am I doing? What did I do wrong? I need to talk to somebody.
Are you just executive director?
I want a czar. I want a bunch of initials. I want to be one of those. You know when people went to. I have a friend. Yeah, I went
CSS.
a friend who went to a lot of medical school.
Yeah,
and her business card, her email signature is like 3 lines long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I think it's good for people to be like, I earned this thing. Like, I'm going to put every associate's degree. I'm going to put every certificate.
If I had a PhD, I'd be acting different. You couldn't tell me. No, absolutely
Oh,
not.
absolutely
not.
Don't let me get a PhD.
No. My kids would refer to me as doctor.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Auntie.
Yeah,
it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Don't let me get no doctor. I start acting
that.
so annoying at the drive-thru. No, it's doctor to you. Can you have a large fry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. What? You have Doctor of Philosophy. See, why don't you do that?
What?
Philosophy?
No? Yes.
Listen, I don't know how many people out there still want to learn about that.
Listen, it might be more important. I think it's kind of like.
I actually feel super important right now.
I think the classics are kind of like fashion, where it has its time.
Yeah.
But like when it feels like it's very out of style, I feel like that's right when it's about to come back in vogue.
Yeah, that's
right?
so
When
true.
it's one of those things that people aren't paying attention to, I feel like that's your canary in a coal mine. We're like, you know what? Like, we should start thinking about that. We should start thinking about that a little harder. Like, it's been too quiet for too long. It's like having little kids, right? When you don't hear them,
You don't hear from them.
you're like,
Something's not
that's
right.
that's not good. I should investigate that. But yeah, we are happy to be back. We had some weather. We had it's been a little bit of a weird couple weeks here in
Happy
Charlottesville,
Black
but
History Month.
We are
'cause
back.
we ain't been here.
We missed almost all of Black History Month.
Oh, wow.
You know what they say.
That's a
All
shame.
the snow.
Yeah, it was so cold.
Yeah, it was really cold.
And now it's 60 degrees.
Phil the groundhog was right.
Did he? Went
He
full
did
winter?
5 more weeks.
Did he?
Yeah, he saw his. I don't know which way it goes. I read the article saying we're gonna have 5 more weeks of winter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the day after he did that, it was like 50 degrees, and we were like, "That's funny. Like that's
Sure.
never gonna happen."
Yeah.
And then it snowed like 15 inches in February. So I feel like I was like dissing him, but like he did it.
Well, I mean, it is a scientific process, right?
The groundhog.
Yeah, clearly.
Isn't it a coin toss? It's a coin
It was
toss.
I was
It's
like,
got to
no.
be less than that. I mean, we're like ascribing meteorological phenomenon to a rodent.
Yeah,
like
no.
it's got to be worse than a coin toss,
I'm
right?
telling you, it would be great if it was actually accurate, wouldn't it? Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
He can do it.
Y'all have spoiled it for me because I
do
thought
it.
that he was really telling the weather.
Yeah, Lord have mercy. Mariane, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, another day. What for folks, so the sort of our running joke after however many episodes, it's like we do this whole thing and we research people and send you questions and then we don't ask any of them.
Oh, good. Hey,
But there's one that we have always asked everyone, which is tell us a little bit about you, and then we typically take this, relatively chronologically, right? So we'll start young, we'll figure out how you got here, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Oh, well, it's a very long story.
Perfect.
We got the time.
That's what we're here for, yeah.
If it was short, we'd have a problem.
Spare no detail, yeah.
The show wouldn't exist if we had people with short stories.
Those are the worst ones. We joke we had some folks on here before who were a little less comfortable in the booth, and we would ask them questions and they would nod.
They would nod. They
Oh.
nodded. And we was like,
And we're like, no one can see you.
and we were looking at each other. You have to say the answer out loud.
Yeah,
And
no.
we would ask them another question. They were like, January. We were like, tell us when you were born. January in a town. We was like,
I've never looked at a clock so hard in my life.
No,
I
it was like,
my
Oh,
God.
that's a lot. That's a lot. My daddy knocked that out of me real quick when he'd be driving and you're nodding at him. He's like, listen, I'm driving.
Right. Oh, you're right.
I cannot see what you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Oh man! So we are immigrants to the U.S.
Okay.
My family immigrated here when I was a young kid, and so I grew up in Los Angeles County, out in Long Beach, California,
Right on.
and moved to the East Coast. Met my husband, moved back to the West Coast, lived there for another 15 years, and then had an opportunity to come out here in 2021, I guess it was. So we've been in Charlottesville now, actually, really the beginning of 2022. So a little more than 3 years. So it's been great. Yeah, that's the geographical history. I don't know what all, because it's a long history when we talk about all the other stuff.
Yeah,
so.
well, fill in some of that other stuff. I mean, talk about, and as you're able and comfortable, talk a little bit about your family. And I mean, what was that dynamic like? What are your memories of that? And kind of, thinking about, this whole thing is about what makes you you. So, whatever ingredients are part of that, let's put them in the pot.
Listen, I was real blessed. We're Coptic Orthodox Egyptians, and so that's a really old and ancient form of Christianity that actually descended from one of the apostles. Mm-hmm. And so we're a very kind of insular community, but also a very small percentage of the Egyptian population. And so our parents really immigrated here to provide for opportunity for their kids. Mm-hmm. They were in a very good position in their country, and really would have been a lot easier for them to stay there. So we moved across the country. We were in our 40s, and that was just across this United States. Yeah. And it was terrifying and hard and challenging. I can't imagine what it was for them to leave their country. Yeah. Move thousands and thousands of miles away to come here, for the future for their children. So I always start with, my gosh, I get to stand on those shoulders. That's incredible. So I think being able to live into that legacy has been, a tremendous gift, and also burden's the wrong word, but definitely responsibility. Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Did they ever tell you, or did you ever ask why the West, like why LA? Is it just, of all the hubs?
Yeah, so people go where they see that there are other people, right? Yeah. So it happened to be that one of my aunties was in the area. She was living in Inglewood at the time, and then I ended up moving to Orange County, and then I had, a couple other cousins that came out, but really the majority of our family is still in Egypt.
Is that right?
Have very few people here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Every time someone says Orange County, you mean Orange County, California, right?
Not your Orange County.
No, not your Orange County.
No, I'm like, Orange County, that's down the street. Yeah. But
That's Orange okay. For a long time, I didn't get I used to get Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and Williamsburg, Virginia confused. So people were like, we're going to Williamsburg. And I'm like, for what?
For what?
Yeah.
And I was like, I spent a lot of time there. They're like, you lived in New York? And I'm like, we're not having the same conversation. I know. Siblings. How many siblings?
I have an older brother. He's 11 years older than me. Oh, wow. He's pretty tremendous. He's the CFO of Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a low-achieving family. Yeah. Is what we've learned about this group.
The bar is in heaven.
Yeah, cool. All right. Excellent.
But none of my none of my grandparents graduated past 6th grade. So, that just... again, they believed in education. They instilled that in their children. I think every single one. Was it just an access thing? So really, the part of it might have been that, but the Egyptian education system was really brought over by Great Britain.
Sure.
And really during occupation. And so, that sort of colonialization piece might have had something to do with. Yeah. And at the same time, our families, they're nevertheless... we were very privileged. My family was quite privileged. They were financially stable and all the things, but they were still, it's a occupied country. So, sure. I think there's the hidden, what do we say? It's like the inauthentic histories that we get to read about, right? But the authentic histories where you actually read the documentation that the British actually wrote about Egyptians and just the terrible derogatory comments that were made. So it makes tremendous sense that people were not necessarily included in the educational system initially, but certainly striving after that.
Sure. Yeah. I was in London not too long ago, and it always strikes me in London that British food is the worst thing on earth. And I stand by that. I stand by that. I will say that publicly to everyone. But here's why. It's exactly that. There is no British culinary culture. Where the ethnic food is the best I've almost ever had
I heard it's up there in London.
Unbelievable. Of all things, Taiwanese and Thai and Indian and African, amazing.
Yeah,
but then you go to the Heathrow and it's like you want a can of beans. I'm like, this is horrific. They have no culture. It isn't anything. Their whole history is colonized.
I told somebody before that it feels like post-war remnants. Like they're eating beans and potatoes because
in the bread line.
There was a war. There's been plenty of wars, right? And they started doing a rationing situation, and the main foods was beans, potatoes,
right?
I don't know what they put tuna.
There's toast,
and toast, and so your grandparents start eating just that. They start making random meals to try to diversify your palate, and that's all they have. And then they're like, they forget. Time goes on, the war's end, but you're like, oh, I kind of liked it, so they keep eating it. And it's like, oh, we don't know why we're eating tuna and beans and all this stuff. But it's like it's remnants, it's leftover effects of war. Someone needs to write on it. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
It has to be a colonial thing, though. Like, you didn't build any culture for yourself. Your whole history is just occupying other places, and so you adopt those customs. So you go to downtown London, it's Dishoom, it's Thai places, it's Chinese places, it's Japanese places, and it's awesome. But it is funny to then go to the airport and be like, yikes. It's like Starbucks, Panera, and the weirdest, like, yeah, I'm not eating beans for breakfast. Get out of here with that.
There's a Keith Lee, the guy who does he does food. He rates food places in America, but he went to London.
Okay.
And he went to this place and he got like a tuna fish, beans, and potato meal, and he was like, "What in the world?" That's what I was thinking about that.
Yeah,
it's shocking.
It is.
I'm
it is
shocked.
Bizarre. What do you guys get back to Egypt at all often?
Not
really?
often. Not often. Yeah, we keep trying to schedule a trip out. I'd love to see family before my kids get a little too old to make that trek. But with their moms and dads, they can do it on their own. But, it's been great to be able to kind of live into that legacy.
Yeah,
just be able to come here in this country and really forge kind of that next generation of.
Do you have, I love asking folks this who've immigrated here. I asked Tristan Cabeza this and Tony DeSoroy, some other folks. Do you have memories or any documentation, or talked to your parents about like what they thought America was versus what it was when you got here? And all of my experiences going abroad, whenever I talk to people, they know New York, they know LA, they know sort of Miami and kind of thing, right? But I think it's hard to conceive of how weirdly big America is, right? And just how like bizarrely heterogeneous it can be, even inside of states. Was there any, because I have a friend who was Egyptian, and he was like, yeah, he went to William and Mary, and he was like, I thought, America to me was like New York. Yeah. Which is like, it was the same kind of thing. The way we see the Middle East, we're like, oh, yeah. And then you go to Istanbul, you're like, oh. Yeah. Huh. You know what I'm saying? Does it work both ways?
I don't know. What I can tell you is, so because it's a very, people don't generally get vehicles, get cars or anything. My parents were quite older. My dad was born 1934. My mom was born 1938. So neither of them learned how to drive until they were in their 40s. Wow. And so
my grandma didn't learn how to drive until she was in her 40s and 50s.
So that kind of makes your world smaller. Yeah. Right. Sure. And particularly California is a very car dependent place. That's right. And so I think the U.S. to my parents was like Buena Park, California. You know what I mean?
Okay,
it was like,
interesting.
It was the little places that we ended up living. Yeah. And continuously expanded as they sort of started to explore a little bit further. But my dad would joke around, if we would get lost somewhere in like some small town in California, he'd be like, "Let's go see America." Like that's kind of that's the extent of it. I think for folk, particularly when they first newly immigrate somewhere, because you just are trying to put roots down.
Yeah, and you have your touch points. It's I know where the laundromat is. I know where the restaurant is. I know, right? Like I've got my thing. Yes. I can imagine it being extremely daunting in a place that's different in every way, and you also you don't find out it's huge until you start to walk the boundaries, and you're like, oh, I haven't even made it out of the neighborhood yet.
Exactly.
Right.
And so you're living in LA, and you're growing up. What do you do when you're ready to go off? Are you expecting to stay in LA? Did you want to go to the East? I know, so what were you thinking when, you got out of high school? What is young Mariane thinking she's going to do next?
So I got into a college in Massachusetts when I was 16. And so I thought I was about to hop on a plane and leave my parents. And my parents, just, oh my gosh, they were so sad. And so I just couldn't do it. So I made a deal with them, and I said, if you let me leave high school early and go to community college, I won't go to the East Coast. And so
really,
so it worked. They said, "Got her."
Listen, they.
No, she lives here. It didn't work.
It worked for a little bit.
She just played the long game. Statute of limitations was up after a couple of years.
Exactly. No, so I went to community college at 16. And
why did you blitz through school so fast?
I was bored. I was bored.
I feel like that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could blitz through it, though. I was like, okay, I'll just wait till I can do the next set of stuff next year.
That's right. Yeah. No, I was bored. I was doing all the right things. I was doing good at school. I was in athletics. I was doing all the right things. Okay. I was like, man, this is boring. So, I was ready to move on. Yeah, and so, started college. But you know what? I think God does things, to kind of set your life up. And so if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been in California when my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so that was a pretty life-changing moment for us. And so it was great that I did not leave, actually, and I had stayed.
And so trace that path for us. So community college, you're 16. What are the next, what gets you sort of through your adolescence and then, sort of starts the building blocks for where we're headed?
Sure. So I started my career, actually, I was thinking about this the other day. I said, gosh, I actually started my career in nonprofits. I was a volunteer with the Brill Institute. So I worked 200 hours a year, as a volunteer and worked with children. And so I did that for a couple of years while then also starting a career in the hospitality industry. So I worked in the front office of a hotel, which was kind of a big deal back then, know. And so, when everybody else was making, I don't know, $3-4 an hour, I was making $6 an hour. And I was proud of it, man.
Absolutely.
I was like, this is cool.
When older people talk about the times, I'm like, this is crazy.
I was making $7 an hour to play in sports. Yeah. I was loving it.
It was great. It was great.
Yeah. I had a putting green set up in the back, man. Yeah, it was awesome.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right there on 29. Yeah.
Yeah, I know I played against Sports.
You bet.
That's
Still
amazing.
standing.
The best,
Did my time.
working we got.
I keep forgetting I have to do this. If you are just joining us, this is Envision Radio from the United Wave Greater Charlottesville News Radio 98.9, 1070 AM, WINA. Price and Markey here with Mariane and Doyle, brought to you by the Jefferson School Foundation. Now that we have sponsors, we have to do the actual thing.
And we love them.
We're an adult. We're an adult show.
That's right.
We're growing up right in front of your eyes. So you start working, and you're still out west at that point, right?
I'm still out west.
Okay.
I still, ended up transferring to Cal State Long Beach and got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, and then started teaching right away. So I actually started teaching both in high school and college at the same time.
What?
So in the morning I would go teach 10th grade English and business, and then at night I'd go teach English as a second language to newcomers to the country. And
no kidding.
so did that, and then ended up deciding to go with the adult population. Oddly enough, even though I was totally in love with K-12, I was young. I was a young teacher.
Do you remember that? I think about that often, that there's this weird paradox between sort of relatability and sort of feeling like you're authoritative enough to do it. When we think about this all the time, I'm sure you do too, where for a lot of kids, it's there is that sweet spot where you're young enough to be cool but old enough to be taken seriously.
Right.
Especially for middle school and high school kids.
Yes,
if you get too old, you're lame and they don't like you.
Yeah.
And obviously if you're too young, you're too close to it. I mean, do you remember how you felt being young? Did you feel too, was it, you were just I was just a little too young and I couldn't quite get there, or what was that like?
Listen, it was complicated. So both of my parents were teachers. My dad was 6'3" and just this massive, amazing English teacher who commanded respect. And my mom was an itty bitty little woman. She was, I think, 5'1" or something, or 5 foot, but taught special education, and of course was much older than I was. And so she commanded respect in her way. And I was a kid. I mean, I would literally, the vice principal would try to catch me and bring me back on campus and tell me about how you can't cut class. And I'm like, listen.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm a teacher here.
I work here.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
So I think I was just too young, and it's funny because I remember I sat with the superintendent at one point, and she said, "Are you sure you don't want to stick to?" I had been substitute teaching and long-term teaching while I was getting my degree,
Yeah.
So I had taught kindergarten for about half a year, and it was exhausting. My gosh. And so she's like, "Are you sure you don't want to, teach the younger ones? I think that'd be better for you at your age." And I was like, "No, I want to go. I got this master's degree in English. I want to go teach English."
Yeah.
Biggest mistake I ever made. I should have listened to her. Should have listened to her.
That is, hindsight is 2020. But you also never know how that would have played out. I was like, people are like, I'm upset because I don't know how that option would have went. But but it could have been this could have been the best option.
Listen, different set of problems with the little babies.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's kindergarten sounds exhausting. I'm like,
it was
they
exhausting.
Don't listen. They don't. Am I supposed to be teaching them ABCs? You don't know your ABCs.
It's hard.
Listen, Marky, I took an Advil going and an Advil leaving. I was like, man, this is a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And I think about the teachers today, the world we live in now, teaching. I'm like, that's just too much added stress. Like, but it's like the retention is high, so it's like retention's low.
Very low.
So like, you have to make millions of teachers every year to keep every teacher you need in stock.
Well, there's that, and so I'm a big proponent of really, really good teacher preparation. I wasn't ready in many ways. I was ready in some ways, academically, and I had the content. But I wasn't ready for when I started teaching kindergarten. And my first or second day, a kid lifts his shirt up and tells me that his mommy had just beat him today with a chair.
Yep.
You know, no one told me. No one prepares
That's not in
you
the
for that.
They don't
curriculum,
prepare
right?
you for
That's not in
that.
the curriculum.
They don't prepare you for
That's
that.
not in the curriculum. So I think that's where the youth, I think, was really hard. It was hard when I started teaching high school and the kids would come and tell me about how they were homeless or hungry. And nobody told me about you need to have peanut butter and jelly in your closet. Nobody told me to do that. And I found, you know, when I first started teaching high school, I think I was only making $27,000 a year.
Yeah.
And you had to buy all your own teacher supplies.
This is crazy.
And then I needed to buy food for the kids, you know?
right.
And so it was that. And I'm sure, I hope, God willing, I hope things have changed since then. But, you know, it was tough. That was a tough introduction to what it meant to be more than, you know, the curriculum.
Yeah. Well, and they have, but that's an interesting point because that's what probably at least 15, 20 years ago, right? We still, in my estimation, have not caught up with exactly what you said, that much of teaching exists outside of curricular activities, right? We are so focused on your ability to pass a praxis, to have content knowledge, when much of the reality, to your point, exists outside of that boundary.
That's right.
You know? And so it is interesting to me to think about, and we talked about this when we met a couple weeks ago, of like the amount of content knowledge that these students get is so heavily dependent on what they walk into that building with.
Exactly right.
And if we're normalizing for that, then really the people that are getting the content knowledge are the people that don't got all the stuff to be. And so I just wonder like how you think about that. I guess the big question is like, was that part of why you were like, all right, this teaching thing is like a little much? Because then you ascended into, you know, into sort of into more leadership roles. Were you? I've met two classes of teachers.
Yeah.
Teachers that love kids and want to stay teachers. Teachers that use teaching to be like, okay, my best way to try and improve this is to try and do, you know, higher level and more leadership stuff. Did you want to stay in the classroom? Or were you always just kind of like, I'm going to get out? Or did you have a moment where you're like, all right,
I stayed in the classroom. I just stayed with the adults. I couldn't, I didn't know how to, at 22 years old, handle the tremendous weight that was in that classroom of, you know, 15-year-olds. There weren't that much younger than I was. Right. And so I'm looking at them going, my gosh, I didn't know that I had privilege, because there were days where we didn't have enough pennies to put together to buy, you know, a bottle of milk for the house. I didn't recognize that I actually did have tremendous privilege by having the parents that I had, the support that I had in my home. I didn't recognize that. But then I thought that, you know, when you come from that, it's very different to show up in a classroom as a parent. Well, you do that too.
Yeah, that's right.
But to show up in the classroom as a teacher and recognize that, my gosh, they're, you know, even if they came from a place of privilege and actually had some money, they may not have privilege from a perspective of the support that they have in their household.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
So it was that. It was that I needed to, I think, be able to do the academic part of it and actually teach and learn how to teach and learn how to facilitate. And as my dad then told me, I tried to quit a couple times, and I went home at one point. I was so upset. My dad was, like I said, both my parents were phenomenal teachers, but I got to watch him teach, and he was a reverend in the classroom. It was amazing. And I came home one time and I said, Dad, I just can't do it. This kid just came with this story, whatever the story was, and I just was in tears, and I was up every night grading till midnight, and then I'd be, you know, at school at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And he said, he only got angry at me a couple times, and this was one of them. And he turned to me and he said, you don't love them enough.
Huh.
You do not love them enough. You get back in that classroom and you show those kids love.
Yeah.
And so I did. And so it was a successful year, but I just couldn't, the emotional toll was too much. And so I found that maybe I was emotionally safer in teaching adults. And nevertheless, adults have their challenges and issues too, where I still had students that were homeless and all of the things, but they were not in a dependent state, so I could talk to them, right?
Yeah.
I could have those difficult conversations with them and be able to relate to them adult to adult. It was very different than looking at someone who really had no autonomy, right? And no ability to really make those decisions for themselves. And, you know, Dad had to have that conversation with me even one more time with adult students.
Yeah.
He had to remind me, you need to keep loving. You need to keep loving your students.
I have potentially cynical question that is not intended to be, but they sometimes
You always say
they
that.
sometimes come out. Well, they just come out like that sometimes. I'm trying to, it's a thing with my wife. I'll be somewhere and she's like, "Are you happy?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Tell your face that." And I'm like, "Okay." So I'm being conscious of like, what I'm putting out into the world, not just my intent. But I say that to say, you mentioned something that I think is interesting. My parents were both career teachers as well, and it's funny you say that. My dad is a giant. My mom is very small. My parents are 6'4" and 5'2", so it's sort of a similar architecture. They're both teachers, both very powerful in very different ways. But you mentioned something that, I think we've all observed with good teachers is that, like, there is it becomes very personal very quickly, right? And I'm interested in your take of whether or not that's good or bad. And I only ask that to say that if we're relying on a person's ability to shoulder the emotional toll that comes with like being invested in that way in kids who need different things at different times, I think you could make a cogent argument that like that's a system failure if we have to rely on people like your father to be the ones that stay.
Yeah.
Because we're not supporting them properly. We're certainly not paying them enough. We're just
That's
like,
right.
You need someone who can withstand that maelstrom of sorts to do the job.
Right.
You could also argue that like, it's beautiful. It's lovely. It's right. It's what makes the thing. But I wonder if sometimes we use that as a smokescreen for the reality of it, which is like that's why turnover's so high because that makes the job impossible. Right. And the system's not backstopped to say, yeah, you shouldn't be feeding kids, or at least shouldn't be funding it.
Right.
We'll do the bare minimum and get you the food to feed it. Right. But we romanticize those stories that are incredible.
Right.
But I wonder if that's net negative or positive, because ultimately you could argue that like you could look at him and be like, hey, that's not my job, nor is that what I'm trained to do.
Right.
So like, how does that? Is there a long term is there an end?
Yeah.
I mean, like, how do we do that? How do we sort of decouple ourselves from saying there will be incredible people that will go above and beyond, but like that does not a system make?
Yeah, I think so. It's complicated because what Dad experienced and Mom experienced. So my parents, really left the high school classrooms about when I did, actually. I think my mom, well, that's not true. My mom passed away when I was 26 or 27, and she worked until like 6 months before that. So probably she lasted another several years, but Dad was out of the classroom. So I bring that up to say that was before accountability, right? So that was before standards. Yeah. That was before accountability. My mom kind of had to bring that accountability structure into the classroom. She was the department chair for special ed, so she had to actually help, kind of infuse that in. When I came back to K-12 as an administrator, I had to help bring Common Core into the classroom. So there's this tremendous push for accountability. So those soft pieces, I don't know how teachers are able now to balance it all. I think there was a moment or a time prior to accountability where I think I benefited tremendously from the tremendous ability of teachers to kind of show love and be present and do all these things that people. I saw and be people and show all these things that I got to witness my parents doing. But when my generation came in to teach, it was at the very beginning of that accountability, and it was the No Child Left Behind. It was at the very beginning of that.
Yep.
And so we were kind of thrust into academics. We didn't have that same sensibility that you would see on, old movies when you look at the one-room schoolhouse. That kind of came in, that philosophy, I think, moved forward or continued forward. My elementary school teacher taught in a one-room schoolhouse. Yeah. In Nebraska, years before she had migrated, to California. So it feels to me like we're asking too much of people, not because we're asking them to provide the care and the love and the food and all that, but because we're asking them to do that and accountability. I think at some point something's got to give, and I think that's why you're seeing the tremendous turnover. We're not, we're trying to say that it's on the families, it's on the parents, that we're trying to push it that way, but we haven't looked at the social pieces that are preventing or the obstacles that are preventing families from really standing in that position. Sure. And then, blaming, effectively the school systems for, well, why aren't the kids, succeeding? Well, because you're asking too much of the school system, frankly. Pick one. right?
Pick a lane, right? And that was
Right.
my next question is, can you do both? Because it seems like the points we've plotted where we go into this high accountability direction and then we sort of swing back now, where I would argue we've sort of gone in a heavy socio-emotional direction,
Yeah.
right? And it seems like we are going to normalize, I guess, at some point, but we have this conversation often all the time that we have these massive demonstrated discrepancies in foundational knowledge, particularly for minorities and under-resourced kids, but we've gone sort of so far in the other way that now we're not having the tough conversation on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. And from your point of view as someone who's taught and someone who's been an administrator, I mean, is it possible? I mean, I have to believe it's possible, but like, what are we missing? What have we missed in kind of the last 25 years, right? As a way to put this thing together to say we can do both, right?
Yeah.
Like we can allow our teachers to be real people. We can also hold families accountable. We can also can all those things be true? I have to believe that more than one thing at a time can be true, but it seems like we issue select, right?
Yeah.
It's a hardcore academic thing, and we go, well, that didn't work. And we go, it's a hardcore, socio-emotional thing. And we go, well, that's kind of not working either, because we're not seeing the movement that we thought we would see in the quantitative pieces.
Yeah. I think if you ask the best teachers, good teaching is good teaching is good teaching. It's never changed. And that's why when I went around and was doing Common Core training across the state in California, I talked to one teacher who was a good friend, and he said, listen, I respect you so much. And he said, I see why you believe that this is really important for us to look at these standards and integrate them in order to pursue student achievement and to push that forward. And he said, and actually in philosophy, I agree, right? Philosophically, I agree.
Sure.
But I'm going to close my door and I'm going to do my thing.
Yeah.
And you will never know. Right? And I had respect for that because he was honest about it. And so I think good teaching, he's still to this day one of the best teachers I've ever seen. But he does it his way, which is a really beautiful blend of caring about kids while also pursuing the academics. But he does largely ignore the state standards. I'm not going to lie. He believes that you have to move the content forward so that you know in your own head what those competencies are, so that when the student leaves the classroom, they can be successful. And when the student leaves the school and goes into the workplace or goes into college, they can be successful. But largely ignores, what has been kind of prescribed. And I don't know, the structure in Virginia is quite different with the way that the SOLs are kind of laid out and so forth. So I think you might have a little bit less flexibility here than maybe people did there.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I'm sure that some of the best teachers here just know good teaching is good teaching. And they pursue that and push that forward regardless of what accountability structures look like. They know that they have to tend to the needs of the kids. Their kids are not going to learn when they're hungry. They're not going to learn when they're sleepy. They're not going to learn when they're being bullied. Like, there's none of that, right? So they tend to the needs of the kids while also ensuring that we push forward on the academic agenda. If I were able to be a superintendent one day, it would be that I'm more worried about what the kid's going to do when they graduate school than what they're doing. And my son's in fifth grade, right? How does fifth grade prepare my son for his future? That's what I'm concerned about as a parent, and I would hope that as a country we think more strategically in that direction as opposed to, well, what standard did we do in this particular classroom in this particular day?
That's right.
And so you stop teaching young children, you go to adults, and then how do you get to the East Coast and out of essentially teaching to this large leadership roles that you now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I, have continued to teach in higher ed, and I'm blessed that UVA still calls me up once in a while and says, "Why don't you come do a one-day class here, one day class there?" So I'm really grateful for that because I do miss the classroom oftentimes. But what happened was, I'd spent 15 years in academic administration in a variety of different roles and really loved it. Really loved the work that I did. But always worked alongside nonprofits, sat on nonprofit boards, supported nonprofits, and kind of went, y'all look like you're having a lot of fun over there. Like,
that was, we tricked you.
For real. No, but it really was that there was kind of this, there's so much paperwork. And paperwork, I use that in government. I use that loosely. I mean, all of the restrictions that you have, so that every time you try to move the needle forward, you're stepping back about 10 paces just to move one pace forward, right? So I really wanted to see what it was like. Why are they able to move the needle forward over there so much more quickly than I can?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, let's give this a try. So so I was really excited once CNE, kind of had not just had the opportunity, but the community kept. The funny story was that the community kept nominating me for the position, and I kept saying, I'm good.
Yeah.
And so I was so grateful that, it continued to kind of pop up and had the opportunity. And when I walked in for the interview into the building, it was the first time I'd ever been to CNE. It just felt like home. It felt like I'd always been there. And so that was tremendous. And so just being able to be trusted and again, incredibly blessed to be in that space, to be able to lead it and alongside a really great team of people that just believe in the work. They believe, they believe in the nonprofit systems. They believe in the nonprofit ecosystem is what I mean. They believe that, we have to address the social needs of our communities, and that the way we support doing that is by supporting those who are doing that work, the boots on the ground work. So yeah, that was kind of the long story. I think the shorter story is, listen, I think COVID was a moment where everyone did some real deep down self-reflection. And my dad died in 2019. My mom died in 2007. So really those kinds of familial ties, other than my brother and my cousins, all of a sudden we felt severed from the reason we had stayed on the West Coast. And so my husband and I kind of looked at each other. He's from Pennsylvania, and we were kind of like, well, we were here for my family for 15 years. We should probably think about moving to the East Coast to be there for his family. And it's just turned into, an incredible adventure.
How did you, what was here? Was it the university? Was it, were you aiming for Philly? Were you like?
Oh, so my husband's from he's from the Altoona area. So he's on the western.
Sure. Yeah.
And so we just kind of looked, what's within 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
And someone actually nominated me again for a position at Monticello to be vice president there. And it was kind of like a museum.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I've never done that, but that sounds really fun.
It does sound fun.
It can be.
And
we can
the
talk about
history
that
piece. Wrestling with that history, I think, sounded really amazing. Sounded like a great challenge. And so we went
items
for
back
it.
now.
It's very Black Panther of you. Right?
Send them their statues back now. Then I'm like, oh, museums don't seem too fun. I would lose all our pieces. Don't let me be no museum person. I'm like, if they call me, I'm going to just give it back. I don't know about the process. I don't know about the paperwork. I'm going to send it FedEx. I'm going to send it FedEx. Overnight shipping back to you and your
we'll
people.
They're
going to come in. They're going to be like, the investor going to be like, hey, this was a full museum. I'm like, I know, but like
they all
asked me.
for it.
They asked for
You
it.
didn't tell me I couldn't send them back. So
How long were you at Monticello?
A year.
A year.
Yeah, a year.
What was your what was your experience like? And not at Monticello specifically. I worked with a couple people in and around some really interesting and cool people. Justin Reed being one of them, Nia Bates, Hannah Scruggs, and some folks who were really, really interesting. But we used to have those conversations often of just like the inherent weirdness. And I was at Montpelier during all this stuff. I went to Montpelier to launch a slavery exhibition in the midst of all of the stuff. And so it was before that. We launched in 2016, and then 2017 happened. It's in Orange County and the whole thing. But was it weird to you? Because it wasn't weird to me, and then it was, of just like working there and being there all the time.
Yeah.
It was just very dissonant.
Yeah.
And it was also very cool, and I think it was an experience that I would not have taken, and I'm glad I did take it. But I don't know that I was, sort of to your point about teaching, I don't know that I was quite mature enough to really understand what was happening until after I left.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, how did you feel about, you were much deeper in your career, and
that's how most things
you're
go.
much smarter than I am already anyway,
that's right.
but what was that like? What was that like for you, or was it just a job?
No, God, no. You can't just go work there and have it be just a job. I don't think. Maybe you can. I don't know. It definitely was not my experience. So yeah, I was there for a year as VP, and then they were gracious to keep me on as a consultant for another year. So I got to stay connected. It's a tremendous family there, and so it's a lived, shared experience that's unlike anything else, I think. The mountaintop is interesting. Yeah, I mean, all the things about the United States of America and how we were founded, and just this being, it's a paradox. I mean, everything about it. Whether you think about, gosh, TJ really talking about, having life, liberty, all of the. Well,
Sure.
actually, that's the Declaration. Well, that is the Declaration.
Yeah.
Almost, I was like, did I just quote the Constitution?
Yeah.
Life, liberty,
Give
pursuit
you the
of
We the
happiness.
People speech.
Right?
Yeah.
All people are equal, but not really. Like, just kidding. So I think that really speaks to humanity. I think there's a lot, that's why we have the sayings that we sing, do as I do, not as I say.
Sure.
Or do as I say, not as I do, I mean. I think that's why we have those things. I think human beings have paradoxes. Every single day we are that way. But at the same time, we don't really want to wrestle with it. So I appreciate that places like Monticello and Montpelier are leaning into, well, we got to wrestle with this. We can't just pretend that it didn't happen. And grateful for leadership, as you mentioned, Justin Reed, Nia Bates, Andrew Davenport over there now. I mean, they're just doing tremendous work, and it's a huge lift.
Right.
Grateful that they continue to look to interpret history honestly.
Yeah. Montpelier leaned in and then fell out. I can say that. I'll stand behind that. If you are just joining us, this is Envision Radio from the United Way of Greater Charlottesville, City of Promise, News Radio 989, 1070 AM WINA. Price here with Marky and the Executive Director, CEO, President, Leader.
Oh, boy.
Top dog.
A couple
Mariane
more times
Doyle.
that
That's
you
right.
don't know
That's
why you
exactly
don't got.
right. The initials I don't even understand. I can't even interpret the laundry list of accomplishments of. Why don't you use Doctor?
I was wondering the same
Mariane
thing.
Doyle.
This is a Charlottesville
Dr.
thing.
President,
It is.
CEO,
It's
Mariane
a
Doyle.
Charlottesville thing. We don't refer to PhDs as doctors in Charlottesville. So
Oh, really?
I actually saw a couple doctors that I didn't know were doctors until I read their bios.
What?
But I think you should be.
yeah,
Dr. President, Director, CEO.
I think you should be putting doctor in it.
Listen, I'm not gonna tell you how to live your life. I might call you Dr. D, though.
I like that.
I'll take it. I was Dr. Doyle until I moved to Charlottesville, and all of
Really?
a sudden it was
We can bring it
Mariane.
back,
I was like,
though.
what the heck happened here? All
We
right,
are
it's cool.
trendsetters.
Listen,
Cool.
your initials are MD. You could be Dr. MD.
Oh, I
Double
love
doctor.
that.
Let's do it.
See? That's why they pay me the big bucks.
And that's why they
what
pay
that
you the
meant,
big
right?
bucks.
See? Yeah.
If I had came up with it, then they
See?
started paying me the big bucks.
That's all it takes.
One grandiose idea.
One pun and you're in. So you transitioned to CNE, and talk a little bit about. So you've charted a path that has been close to education for the majority of your career.
That's right.
What was it like? And even at Monticello, you're still you're education adjacent, or
Right,
you're working in public history, which is one could argue an educational enterprise, right? So what is it like to step a little further outside of that, right? And there are still some education aspects to it, but much less direct. I mean, is that, you've built a career in sort of that space. Is it a relief? Was it why?
Yeah.
Did you feel like you needed something else? Was it too good to pass up?
So I've always been a systems thinker, and I think that was part of my frustration in education because you were kind of siloed into do your lane.
Sure.
Where I knew that it required much more than the narrow lanes that we were being given. So, and that's why community service was always important to me, because that community connectiveness was what I think helped all the work that I got to do in education actually be successful, because it was surrounded by community. I always struggled with staying in my lane, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
CNE is actually very much an educational institution.
Because it feels really education.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't feel like a step back. It feels like education.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't say step back.
A step further. What did you say?
I said out. She's out of the lane. She's moving out of the lanes. See these things? There's a method to my madness.
We should have a playback button.
I mean, it's recorded.
I know, but live.
We do. It's
But live.
We do have a playback
No, but
button.
that's
It's
later.
being recorded.
We should have a button. Like, I think you said that just now, and now but I can't prove it right now.
Oh,
'Cause
you want like a record scratch, like
and then they play what you said again.
Well, I'll tell you what. We'll listen to it when they air it. We'll listen to it, and then I will text you and say, "See,
Oh my goodness!"
at minute 45,
He will.
don't misrepresent me to the fine people of Charlottesville, Virginia."
This whole thing is a misrepresentation.
Anyway. Talk about CNE for people who I'm fairly confident that everybody knows of it.
Yeah.
I would be less confident that everyone knows what it is. And I just say that from a standpoint of, I think Charlottesville is a very small town that has a lot of sort of similar actors in similar places. But I think to your point, it can feel very insular for only being 10 miles, square.
Yeah.
So, what is, and I think it's also when you have a leadership change, you get a different flavor.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so what is that, right? What is your era, your version of CNE that I'm certain is a combination of preserve the legacy and then add your own
right.
floor to the house?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, CNE just is such a tremendous organization. It's almost 19 years old already. And has been a mainstay of Charlottesville for all that time, really helping to fortify the nonprofit sector, not just through education, which is a tremendous aspect of the work that we do, but really being a resource. So, members are able to just pick up the phone and call one of our wonderful senior managers and ask them whatever question that has to do with with nonprofit management, with governance. I need a referral to all of those things. One of our team members, Cindy Colson, says, don't Google, just call us. Like, you're going to get yourself all kind of twisted up with Google. Mm-hmm. Call us. We've done a lot of work.
Google's a liar.
Listen, I have all the terminal diseases because of Google. So
sure.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
Call us. As members, you have that. It's a free, once you pay your membership, it's basically a free asset that will save you thousands upon thousands of dollars, not to mention time, of which we know nonprofit leaders don't have much of. So that's tremendous. And we were able to really work in the systems piece of it by really understanding what's happening in the landscape, informing people of what's happening in the landscapes, all the changes that have been happening since January, really.
Sure.
We've stepped in and provided that information so that people can stay informed, but also hopefully be able to, dive in and make plans so that they don't have to be reactive, but rather proactive around what's happening, what's coming down the pike. We're very nimble as well, so we like to react to what's happening and reevaluate what we're providing so that what we do is responsive and relevant. So we're in the throes of doing that right now to make sure that we're responding to the times. CNE started in Charlottesville and in 2017 expanded, so began a statewide expansion. So we first expanded to Warrenton, so kind of the northern Virginia region and Fauquier and Rappahannock. And then we expanded over to Suffolk, so western Tidewater. We're working now with others in the Tidewater region as well. And this year we expanded to Southwest Virginia. So we have an office there with another foundation in that region. We're excited to continue to kind of think about how we look at the larger Commonwealth ecosystem while still really staying true to our roots here in Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is the Center for Nonprofit Excellence a state-to-state thing? Do other states have a CNE too? Is it like, okay, I was like, it's like a franchise, not like McDonald's, but like each one of the states have one.
Yeah, not each state, but most states do have a similar type of entity. It's usually a statewide association.
Okay.
We're not that at this time, but we are members of the National Council of Nonprofits, of which those statewide associations are also members. Mm-hmm.
What is we've got, 3 folks in here that have done this work for a while. Like, in your estimation, you talk a lot about this issue of siloing, and I find Charlottesville to be a particular funny town, right? It's a small town with a world-class university and a lot of money, and we have the same problems as everywhere else. Yeah. So what is it, right? What is sort of the skeleton key in your estimation, or keys? Because it feels like an excellent lab to try different stuff.
Yeah.
It has a lot of variables controlled for.
Yeah.
It's not Houston, Texas, where the school system has 42 elementary schools, right? It's not New York City. It's not, right? It's 10 miles. Charlottesville, Albemarle, if you take those, it's a handful of elementary schools. It's ton of money.
Yeah.
Really, really intellectually rich area.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal?
Yeah. So when I first came to work at Monticello, I started reaching out to meet some of the nonprofit leaders in the community, and I will never forget. I've forgotten her name. God bless. But she.
But
was
shout out to you.
Shout out to whoever you are. You are an amazing leader. She's a pastor at a church in Charlottesville, and she said, Mariane, she said, what you'll learn quickly is that Charlottesville is a town of really smart people that think that they are the only ones that know the answer.
We're going to play that back, too. We're going to have them run that one.
No, I mean, that's true.
It is true.
Yeah, it's true.
I just kind of scratched my head because I was coming from, a whole different state, a whole different, way of thinking. And I thought, I don't know. That can't be. It's true.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that is true. So I think that the key is actually collaboration. But what we've been talking a lot about is at CNE is collaboration is not just having the same airspace. Like the three of us in this room, we're talking to each other. We're not collaborating, right? We might commiserate, right? We might lean on each other's shoulders, but we're not collaborating. That's work. Like that takes that actually takes some sweat equity to actually make that happen. So I think the key to Charlottesville and the key to the nonprofit sector being successful is figuring out what that actually looks like in practice, right? We talk about, in CNE, we talk a lot about communities of practice, which is another piece that I love that ties back to education, right? We talk about communities of practice. So that means something, right? It's not just a matter of airspace and being in camaraderie, which is important, but it also means putting in that work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the barrier to that? Is it money? Is it people? I mean, like, what is? Because it seems like, to your point, it's signaled often.
Yeah.
And seems like it's actualized much less.
Yeah.
Right. So what is, in your estimation, what is the barrier to entry there for something that you would have a conversation, people would tell you to your face that it makes sense,
right,
and then not do it?
Yeah. I mean, no one wants their cheese moved.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
And no one wants to give up a piece of their pie.
I was thinking about the pie metaphor. I think every resource, even human, us as a resource, people feel like it's a pie. Like
it's a zero-sum game.
It's a zero-sum game.
And if I give a little bit to you, I have a little less myself, even in the world of collaboration. But we're supposedly both trying to create this one thing.
Right.
It still feels like one of us has to own it, and one of us has to pay for it, and one of us has to have the people to do it. Like, I just think it's definitely the path. So
is that a human issue? Is it a creativity issue? Is it an incentive issue? Right, because it feels like, is it a thing? Is it how we're funded? I mean, like, what, like, I think I'm so interested in this thing, as I'm sure you are, of like, what is the stuff we have to do today, tomorrow, and Saturday?
That's right.
But what is the stuff that makes the things that we're doing today, tomorrow, and Saturday easier next year?
Right.
And like, is there a short and long view that's like, today you and I have to do the lunches and the stuff, but like, what if we were able to also move another thing over here,
right?
So that the landscape's different, that the context is different.
Sure.
Assuming, which may be a false assumption, that we're all moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
Like, are we safe to even assume that? Are we safe to assume that, like, we as practitioners are giving a good faith effort to do the thing that we're saying we're trying to do?
Yeah. No, I think it's a mindset issue. I think endemic to both of the sectors I spent the most time in, government and nonprofit, is this kind of scarcity mindset, right? And so we would joke about, when you got the money, I don't know how finances work here in school finance, but back home, if you had the money, you had to spend it by the end of the year. So that's why you had closets of paper clips.
That's
like,
right.
What's with the closet of paper clips?
So many iPads.
Spend the money now.
Yeah, that's
right.
right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think for nonprofits, it's that same kind, not that scarcity mindset, because we don't spend the money.
Yeah, this is not a problem I've yet run into.
We don't try to buy all the paper clips, but what we do try to do is, hoard our piece of the pie. When I truly believe that if we were to look at ways to integrate, I think the pie could actually be bigger. I really do.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this. That I agree with you, and I think many people would agree with you. I think the when the rubber meets the road is when people get really squirrely, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, what does that mean? And it's not. I mean, we're not going to answer that, but I think it's really interesting to figure out, like, because the next step of that is probably someone takes a back seat or a side seat or a window seat, or right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that it, like? My big question is that possible? Not is it possible theoretically? Because like you can draw the lines and you can figure it out. Can you convince the people who have to do it to do it?
Right. Right.
Where do you fall on that spectrum? Are you a cautious optimist? Or are you just like, we got to do the best we can because people are people? Like, do you really think that breakthrough where that conversation will have to be had of like, look, you're the smaller piece of this particular moment.
Yeah.
Is there enough sort of humility and vision for that to happen when human beings are involved?
Oh gosh, that's a loaded question. Isn't it? Last year when I got to meet Tristan Cabeza, I had tremendous hope because he really embodies that.
Yeah,
and he
absolutely.
tries to do that outreach and make those connections happen, and really, again, wants to think systemically. And because
him.
right,
sure, for sure.
And at the end of the day, he's looking at the mission, right? He wants to address the mission,
Yeah.
and everything will come if you address the mission, right? So I do think that there's a gentleman who does a lot of talks in the education world. His name is Dr. Anthony Mohammed. He's great. I think he came out with another book recently. But what he talks about is there's a distribution of people that will take on different initiatives and will actually lean in and do the work. And he says our problem is that we spend so much time focusing on that 20% that just don't want to change. They just don't want to change.
Yeah.
And you put all your effort into that 20%. When what you should be doing, you've got the other 20% that are with it. They want to move.
Yeah.
But you got to work on the 60%. And the 60%
okay.
need to build the muscle.
Right.
They got to build the collaborative muscle. It's just like anything else. If we don't have experience with it, it feels foreign and hard, quite frankly. So I think that's part of the work that CNE has ahead of us is helping people to build that collaboration muscle so that we can be stronger together and we can be fundable. I know at the end of the day as nonprofits, all of us, including CNE, we are a 501c3 just like everybody else.
Yeah.
We are all looking at how do we get funded so that we can continue to serve our missions
Yeah.
next time, next year and next month maybe.
Sure.
Right? So I think helping people to kind of build that muscle and believing in the 60%, because the 20%, they got it, they're moving with it.
Yeah.
They will take what you give and will run and will actually improve it.
Yeah.
But that 60%, that if you don't focus on them, they will
They'll drift.
slowly drift
Yeah.
to the 20. And
That's
we
interesting.
want to avoid that from happening.
That's right.
I thought it'd be a cool idea if we put all of the nonprofits, because there's a whole bunch. There's like over 300 in our planning district. We put them in a little generator and we pick two, and those two people have to put a project together, a deliverable.
Well, I've said for a long time that all these municipally funded grants and things shouldn't accept any applications without at least 4 or 5 organizations attached to it. Yeah. And I think about that, I think about this a lot, and we talked about this from an education standpoint, is that the incentives inherent to the system, if you're a rational actor, I think that's an interesting thing about some of this is like we talk about the way education works and the way nonprofits work, and I could argue that no one's acting irrationally. You're just responding to the incentives that are in the system. If you're incentivized by VDOE to be accredited based on your minority graduation rates, you're going to find a way to pump your minority graduation rate.
Exactly.
Right? So whether or not it's good or bad or right or wrong, it is the rational thing to do. And so if you're in a system whereby you and I are theoretically competing, however you want to structure that, for money, we're not really incentivized to do it together, because if I think my story's better than yours, I'm going to try and cut you out.
Exactly right.
Right? So some of it is, it's sort of like the teacher thing. Is like we're almost right now relying on, people like you, people like Tristan to like circumnavigate the way the system is set up.
Right.
Instead of the system saying, no, we're not going to read anything that doesn't have 8. If you said we're not going to read anything without 8 organizations attached to it,
we would start getting the busy.
You'd have hugs and hand pounds in a heartbeat. Right? And so it's curious to me that at that level, right, the way that institutions are funded, I think if it starts to shift, you'll see a sea change and right, because you'll just be forced to do it. Like you'll start to fade. If you want to play in your own sandbox, you can keep trying that.
Yeah.
But if we disincentivize that behavior, I feel like we'll start to get more motion and it'll be more thoughtful about how do I have to include C&E in my stuff, because I can't run at this alone.
Sure.
I don't know how we get there quickly and at scale without like the context changing, because I think again, people like you, people like Tristan, and people like Ben Allen, I just feel like at some point the gas is going to run out, right? It's like you're hard charging at this thing that you get 60% of the way there. you need to capture 10, but maybe those 10 are some of the bigger dogs that are just like, I don't need to do this because I'm further along than you. And then you're like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I just feel like I'm worried that if we don't preserve the energy of the people who are willing to do that now, what happens when it runs out? What happens when your kid graduates high school and you're like, peace. It's just like, I've done this for 12 years, like whatever, and so I think there's like, it feels like a moment now to figure out how to capitalize on that. But I wonder how you feel about this. Like, is there, outside of the people stuff and outside of sort of the vision stuff, is there a real sort of contextual barrier to making this happen?
Well, I think, we talk a lot about the accountability structure, right? I think you and I have talked before about how, what's measured gets done. And so part of that too is, I think funders are in a place now of self-reflection, just as we are as nonprofits. And so really having kind of those opportunities, because I think that people don't know what they don't know, right? I think people don't recognize. I was talking to a larger nonprofit who said that the amount of money that they have to spend to write the grants, collect the data on the grants, report on the grants, so forth, for that large organization is probably to the sum of $300,000 a year. Is that really, funders, what you want to fund?
That's right.
Or did you want to fund the missions that you're concerned about, right? And so I think that there's an opportunity there that I honestly just don't. There's no way that people know that that's what's happening. Maybe that's my rose-colored glasses coming out. Listen, Bryce.
Yeah,
there can't be. You can't possibly. If I had money and I was giving it to people to that extent, I would not want it spent there. I would want to make sure people were housed and fed and schools were funded, all of the things that people are passionate about.
Well, there was a lot of talk about that, and in the story of the Head Start, right? They're just so rigorous to report on and to mitigate and to legislate that you're right. It takes away from the doing of the thing, right? So how does the system, how do you operate within that system? I think is a bigger question, but an interesting one, given, I think where we all feel like we should be going, and could argue could get there quicker with a little less red tape.
I think so. I mean, I'm coming at it from an asset-based mindset, and so I think until things prove differently, but I believe we can make change. I believe that we can move forward. I believe we can create, and to your point, Charlottesville is a great place to start it. Yeah. You couldn't have a better incubator, quite frankly, because of the way all of the sectors really work together in this community. So I would love to see us capitalize on that and be able to be a leader in that space and be able to say, y'all can bring this to scale elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
If people want to get in touch with CNE, you, and they want to be a part of this big collaboration we putting together, how do they reach you? How do they get in touch?
The website's really easy. It's thecne.org. And we're on social media. Just look up, Center for Nonprofit Excellence, Virginia. It should be a franchise because our name's like all over the place. I don't know who got it first, but other states have it too. Other states have it too. So make sure you look up the one in Virginia. It's the lime green logo. But yeah, definitely be in touch with us. Our senior manager in Charlottesville is Brian Ullman. He's tremendous and always a wonderful resource. And we have a number of staff that are in here in our home base as well to support. So, and I'm all over the place, so I'm a little bit harder to get hold of, but always happy to connect with people in our community locally as well.
You good?
Yeah.
Well, we are done. Thanks to Mariane for joining us. And if you have ideas for the show or want to contact us, check us out on social media on all platforms at United Way Cville, at City of Promise, or drop us a note in vision@unitedwaycville.org. Give us the rundown one more time. thecne.org.
Yes.
And on social media at...
Oh, gosh. LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook for sure. I think those for sure. And they're all... Look up Center for Nonprofit Excellence, Virginia.
That's the one. We get support on this show from our friends at the United Way and, of course, the Jefferson School Foundation. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform for new episodes every week. And, of course, the best way to support us is to, time, talent, treasure to all of our wonderful nonprofits in town. That helps us continue doing our community-based work and, of course, this show. So for Marky, for Dr. President, CEO... Mariane Doyle. This is Price, just Executive Director Price. We'll see you next week.
Bye. Happy Black History Month.